Greetings. A few days ago, my friend and I were hanging out and he decided to watch the first episode of Secret Wars, the new Marvel TV show. As I was watching, I began to have many thoughts about it and considered if it was worthwhile compiling some into a script. To start, I shall state clearly that I have at this point only watched the first episode of Secret Wars and will therefore be considering it in a vacuum, dislocated from the rest of the season. Perhaps it is worth positing that such an assessment is unfair because a season of TV is made to be viewed as a whole. However, because I am not particularly proficient at this yet, for now, I prefer to concentrate my efforts on one 53-minute episode rather than dilute my considerations over several hours worth of content. In addition to that, I have considered carefully what objective I intend for this video to pursue. There are certainly many creators on YouTube that can offer solid, in-depth critique of this sort of media, and I am therefore not so compelled to simply give my variation of that. Thus, the aim for this video will be to consider a what-if kind of approach. I, of course, do not have the ability or knowledge to change the story as a whole. However, I believe I might at least be able to imbue some richness and detail into this episode, add some value. In that spirit, I will impose some limitations. There are a handful of moments in the runtime where the actors are portraying excellent emotional responses. They are moments meant to connect the audience with the characters and their feelings. These instances, where the cast has put in strong performances, are the ones I have chosen to be cornerstones of my assessment. I will do my best to affect them as little as possible. It is worth stating that any other measure of limitation could have been chosen. Perhaps other measures would have been more fair. I do not know. However, this is one I have landed on for this script. I very well might do it differently next time. With all that said, we are brought to the beginning of the episode. There will now be spoilers. We open in Moscow at night, where Everett Ross is convening with an agent named Prescott. The first peculiarity to note is the outside of the building. All of the windows and doors are sealed shut, either with wooden shutters or with bricks. All the openings are sealed, that is, except for two large windows at the top floor, from which light emanates. Yes, this is indeed a nitpick, but I will discuss it nonetheless. Prescott is portrayed as extremely paranoid, and rightfully so. He has been dealing with a variety of alien that can shapeshift into any appearance it likes. He is shown to have isolated himself in fear and distress, and even has failed to report any of his findings to his superiors in the CIA. All of this being laid out, I ask, how much storytelling can be done with one image of a building from the outside? What if every single opening was shielded rather than having two very obvious windows glowing with light, showing clearly to anyone that the place isn't just inhabited? There are probably people in there right now. And furthermore, what if the windows were boarded up very well at the beginning? Because Prescott, being CIA himself, would have taken very good precautions for his survival and safety. However, it becomes clear upon closer inspection that the seals are slowly starting to fail, because the agent has descended into his rabbit hole of paranoia and has neglected to renovate his protective shell. This could be easily implemented by Ross bracing himself against one of the boarded up windows, being careful of his surroundings, only to notice that the plank of wood is a bit wobbly and the nails are loose. These are small details that would go a long way in giving an attentive viewer some environmental storytelling to pay attention to. A similar addition can be inserted when Ross enters the building. Prescott, paranoid as he is, could ask for 2 or 3 different code words, only for Ross to get them all correct and finally be let in. The walk to the top floor could be littered with ingenious alarms and traps that the agent would have set up against intruders, and now he would have to guide his visitor through them carefully. Again, to reiterate, the man is a CIA agent, paranoid and up against an enemy that makes it really hard to distinguish friend from foe. My position is that he would encase himself in an excellently crafted protective shield that would then begin to decay because he doesn't have the mental capacity for its upkeep. Ross and Prescott at this point exchange quite a bit of dialogue about terrorist attacks. Before what comes next, 2 pieces of information must be clarified. Everett Ross is in fact a skrull posing as him, and skrulls are, in this episode, far stronger than a regular human. This is in direct opposition to their introduction in Captain Marvel, where they appear to be as resilient and as strong as humans. Regardless, these 2 pieces of information are relevant because at the end of the conversation, it seems Prescott intuits that Ross is in fact an imposter and attempts to attack him. This results in a scuffle that ends in Ross shooting Prescott with a gun in the middle of Moscow. It is important to point out that guns are very, very, very loud, and firing one in the middle of a city would almost certainly draw a lot of attention to the building you are in. Attention that you do not want, especially if you happen to be a shape-shifting alien pretending to be a CIA agent in the capital of Russia. It would have been, therefore, interesting to see Prescott have the upper hand at the beginning of the fight, and Ross slowly turn it in his favor, leveraging his alien resilience and strength. And then, having worked as CIA for some time, impersonating the real Ross, therefore knowing what a gun is and understanding the capabilities of humans, finding a more quiet way to eliminate his adversary. After the gunshot, Ross exits the building and starts heading towards an extract point, but he is promptly intercepted by Talos. This makes sense. Talos's investment in the Skrull's cause would absolutely lead him to keep an eye on any paranoid CIA agents in his area. This chase ends rather abruptly when Ross seemingly jumps off the roof of a building to his demise. I'm not entirely certain as to what the show wants us to believe happened. However, I would have much preferred for the imposter to be cornered and backing up on the roof, therefore not looking at where he is going, and accidentally slipping and falling, possibly while Talos is trying to reason with him. That would be consistent with Talos's mercifulness in the rest of the episode, and would further push his tragedy in trying but being unable to save his kind. The sequence ends with Agent Hill and Talos meeting at Ross's landed body, and the opening credits start. The images of the opening credits are very interesting indeed. They have a very stylized look and play with strong impressionistic visual language. A lot of powerful imagery is derived from the deformity of a skrull changing skin, and the result is striking and effective. The only change that could be issued might be not to lean too heavily into the green color, because it becomes overbearing and on the nose. As for the score, it's impressive, if not a bit too bombastic. It leans a bit heavily on the patented MCU grandeur, when one might expect a more subtle spy thriller vibe. That being said, it might very well suit the rest of the season. I do not know. We can now move to the continuation of the episode. where Fury arrives in a random field on what I can only assume is a spaceship. It doesn't look like a portal or a space elevator, but admittedly there are no shots of it as a whole, so I cannot know for certain. That being said, assuming it is in fact a spaceship, it was very quiet and very unimpactful. I remember Director Fury walking out of the helicopter near the end of The Winter Soldier. Rotors still spinning, wind getting pushed everywhere. You could just tell by looking at a still frame that the helicopter is a powerful machine made to lift many tons of steel high above the ground. You might therefore expect a spaceship designed for interplanetary travel, holding the power to escape a planet's atmosphere, to at least cause as much mayhem, if not more, than the rotor of a helicopter. Again, a very small detail, but indicative of the breadth of story that can be conveyed with just a still frame or a couple of seconds of video. Hill and Fury drive to what I assume is Talos's apartment, and this is the first of the cornerstone moments that I mention in the introduction. Fury and Talos share a very meaningful exchange, mourning the loss of Talos's wife. Both actors put in a solid performance and convey not only their grief for a lost companion, but Fury's friendship and support for Talos. The conversations that follow are mostly about the antagonist's plans to collect and use explosives, as well as where they might be hiding. But more importantly, they begin planting seeds for characters to doubt Fury's adeptness to this mission. This is a point we will come back to later on. Faced with all this information about his adversaries, Fury decides to go for a walk. He encounters a homeless man, a lady making out on the bench with her partner, and a child with a very large, colorful ball, who is ushered away by her mother. Why, you may ask, have I pointed out all of these details? Because they will be relevant near the end of the episode, I promise. To cap all this off, Fury gets kidnapped. You might think that he would at least be slightly worried about this event. You might think that Director Fury would put up a hell of a fight before allowing himself to be abducted. But you would be wrong. He, in fact, doesn't seem to be the least perturbed by this circumstance. It turns out that he knows exactly who his captor is. In fact, Sonia Falsworth is an operative of the MI6 that he has collaborated with before. Therefore, obviously, her first solution to getting a conversation with him is to send her goons to kidnap him. Sarcasm. It is at this point that Falsworth repeatedly describes her employees as incompetent and inept directly to their faces. This, I will propose, is a very bad idea indeed. It is not clear whether these men are English, sent by the MI6 to assist Agent Falsworth, or Russian mercenaries. They only speak Russian while outside kidnapping Fury, which they would do in either case, and they do not say a word while in the presence of their boss. Regardless of their nationality, given the very sensitive information they have access to about an English Secret Service agent in the capital of Russia, it is a terrible idea to be unnecessarily mean and rude to them. They could very easily speak a few words to any random Moscow officer and unravel the entire operation in a matter of hours. What if we were shown that the goons are in fact mediocre but very reliable, and Falsworth, not finding herself in high-octane combat environments often, much prefers to be cordial and respectful to her companions, valuing loyal and steadfast soldiers, even if mediocre, over extremely efficient but easily swayed or bribed mercenaries. The conversation that follows presents little novel information. Fury manages to plant a spy camera in the room, which will be useful later, and more seeds about his wavering resolve are sown in the dialogue. Before continuing, I find it relevant to go on a slight tangent about the setting of this episode. The story takes place almost entirely in Moscow, but this fact is leveraged very scarcely. Thus far, we have met secret agents from American and English Secret Service, as well as shapeshifters. It would have been very interesting to see how all of these very skilled people use their knowledge of the Russian language to navigate the city, interact with the locals, get themselves out of trouble, pretend to fit in, and so on. However, up to now, there has only been a couple of instances of Russian spoken, and no interaction by our protagonists. In essence, what I am saying is, aside from a few details, this episode could have been staged in London or Sydney, two English-speaking cities, and nothing of substance would have been modified, which implies strongly that the writers didn't consider at all integrating the character of their chosen location into the story, and that, I feel, is a missed opportunity. We move now to 312 kilometers southwest of Moscow. A skrull in a human skin casually walks up to the gate of an abandoned Russian nuclear power plant. The two skrull guards identify him as one of theirs, but do not open the gate. They don't engage in conversation, nor does the newcomer attempt to ask to be let in. The three skrulls, all in full human disguise, inside what we can presume to be a radioactive zone, just stand there in silence like lemons until a car arrives. What if, instead of just walking up to the gate, the refugee was shown to have trouble walking? His hands could be trembling because of the cold and his insufficient clothing. He could be slightly emaciated, and therefore plead with the guards to be let in, appealing to their empathy. One guard could begin to open the gate, and the other could object, stating clearly that orders are to wait for the car to arrive. However, he could simultaneously offer the newcomers some water and a snack across the gate. This would immediately characterize the two guards as caring towards their kind as well as loyal to authority. Traits that would be valued by a civilization that for a long time was on the run from and at war with the Kree. The three skrulls, furthermore, could be having a friendly conversation over some biscuits, regardless of the gate that divides them, rather than essentially putting them on pause until the car rocks up. From the vehicle emerges Gaia, Talus's daughter. She welcomes the refugee to New Skrullos and drives him into the colony. During the ride, she tells the newcomer that only Skrull produce is grown there. They drink Skrull wine and wear Skrull skin. A few details bother me about this dialogue. It makes little sense for the town to be named New Skrullos, after the planet Skrullos. We have many references to take inspiration from in the real world, most notable of which is probably New York, although New London and a second London both exist on the North American continent. If we want to, we can bring up New England and New Mexico as well. It becomes evident after a short Google search that it's usually a city that gets named after other cities, and it's a region that gets named after other regions. I therefore ask, why name your town of 500 Skrulls after the planet of possibly billions? Why not name it after a city or town on the home planet that got destroyed by the war, and have one of the older Skrulls reminiscing about it, telling stories to the children around a fire? Why not seize this wonderful opportunity to give the Skrulls some of their identity and tell us the emotional reason for why they are so adamant to be our antagonists? In second place, If this location is indeed radioactive, and you have chosen it as your safe haven because humans cannot exist in it, why are so many Skrulls not wearing their green skin? The dialogue tells us that the warriors stay in their disguise, so that they may become more comfortable in it over time and therefore harder to suss out. However, many of the human skins are quite old, not particularly in shape, and there's just a whole lot of them all over the place. Why are half of them warriors? Especially since they only seem to have a handful of active soldiers actually involved in their operations. Gaia gives the newcomer a very brief tour of the town before leaving him and going to meet up with the high-ranking warrior Skrulls. This meeting, possibly a sort of graduation ceremony for warriors who have finished their training, is held in a corridor lined with many rudimentary clones of the mind-reading machine that Captain Marvel was trapped in at the beginning of her movie. A human prisoner is brought in, and a graduate is told to take his face and his mind, all of which is resolved in a matter of seconds. And so, I am once again brought to imagine, what if this Skrull colony was more of a character itself, much like Moscow could be? Gaia is the daughter of Talos, a leader known for his compassion and mercy, so much so that those traits are exploited by his enemies. Therefore, we could portray his daughter as having taken a much more brutal line, ready to commit to violence against humans for the survival of her people. But at the same time, having learned mercy from her father, she could be very capable of applying that in certain situations. She could be almost wise about who she is kind to, having learned from the mistakes that she saw Talos make. Along the same line, we could have a very dichotomous Gaia, when she is in the colony, portrayed as motherly and compassionate, taking very good care of those around her, making use of the traits that made her father a great leader, but then putting that side of herself away to deal effectively with her soldiers and any threats that may arise. It would have been a very powerful contrast to draw in her expressions and her mannerisms, between her stroll in town, interacting with her neighbors, introducing the newcomer to this peaceful safe haven, and her appearance at the military meeting, stern and decisive. Speaking of the warriors' situation, Captain Marvel paints a very interesting picture of the struggle between the two warring factions. The Kree are powerful and overwhelming. They rule with an iron fist, and nothing will stand in their way. Ronan the Accuser is very much the icon of this. When told to come to Earth, he brings 3 capital ships and is essentially prepared for a full-scale invasion. Skrulls are the complete opposite. The way they accrue power is through subterfuge. They disguise themselves, hide in plain sight, so well that even the terrifying might of the Kree Empire could not snuff them out. So let's take all of that information and build it into the scene. What if, rather than taking place in a damp corridor, it was staged in a warehouse? A completely separate building dedicated to growing and maintaining the Skrull warriors. What if there were a few sections we could walk through? A very small combat section. After all, Skrulls appear to be far stronger than humans, and regardless, haven't been characterized to prioritize martial prowess. We could then cross into a very large room, filled with sewing equipment, leatherworks, color dyeing, embroidery, jewelry production, and so forth. All designed to replicate in painstaking detail every intricacy of human clothing of any sort. Furthermore, there could be another large area dedicated to practicing mimicking mannerisms, body language, languages, and accents. This way, when we inevitably find out that a skrull has infiltrated the Oval Office, we can believe that none of the staff around them, none of the officials, and not even the CIA agents that might be there were clued into the fact that an imposter was among them. There could even be a sort of observation box, similar to a zoo enclosure, where a skrull taking on a human shell can observe every detail of their anatomy, down to their private parts, just in case they found themselves having to take their clothes off while out in the field. The show tells us that they have been on Earth for 30 years. Therefore, I would like to see an adequate portrayal of the skills and techniques for subversion and infiltration that can be developed in that time. The graduate skrull is told to take a human's appearance and memories. The human has a yellow hat on. Therefore, the skrull grows the mimic of the hat from his own skin, thus making it impossible to remove in the occasion that he enters a building, without everybody noticing that the skin on his head has turned from a hat shape into hair. Lastly, still on this section, the process of taking someone's mind really should be far more troublesome than putting your hand on their forehead for a handful of seconds while standing up. What if it took an entire day, and it was really gruesome and painful for both parties involved? Therefore, the human was tied to a table, and the skrull sat in a chair next to his head. This would be in contrast to Captain Marvel, where the process wasn't as ugly, but that could be easily justified by a lack of access to refined technology, the absence of an AI to assist, the fact that Carol was sedated and the information was merely being displayed on a screen rather than transferred into another living creature. Additionally, the agony that the graduate is willing to put himself through would tell the audience about his commitment to the cause and further display the Skrulls as a formidable enemy, not for their strength, but rather their resolve. We return thus to Fury, Hill, and Talos, watching the spy camera planted in Falsworth's apartment. The MI6 agent seems to be quite distressed about Fury's return to Earth, citing his mere presence to be proof of a danger lurking around the corner. This, of course, raises questions about what he has been developing on Saber and whether any of his work has borne fruit. The episode, however, doesn't address this. Falsworth concludes that the Skrulls must be collaborating with a bombmaker in Moscow. Therefore, she plans to act on that information. Fury, Hill, and Talos will of course also be there, and obviously the Skrulls send Gaia to pick up the explosives. She gets them without being intercepted, and is only noticed by Hill later. But we will come back to that. Fury and Talos meet the bombmaker, but they find out that he is a Skrull. Fury threatens to shoot him to gain information, but Talos prefers to engage in hand-to-hand combat that ends when Fury thinks Talos will be severely hurt and eliminates the enemy. This is rather confusing, because shooting someone isn't necessarily lethal. Shooting them in the arm or in the leg will incapacitate them and stop their attack on your companion, while still leaving them alive to give you information you may desire. Fury was not in any rush or danger. He already had his gun trained on the target. The only reason he hadn't shot was by Talos' request. He could have easily taken aim for a non-lethal but incapacitating shot. Regardless of his rather obtuse punch into submission approach, Talos is justifiably upset at Fury for the death of the Skrull adversary. In the meantime, Hill is chasing Gaia, and they get into a scuffle. Hill obviously loses, being human, but buys enough time for Talos to catch up and confront his daughter. He says, "Last warning," to which she replies, "You always say that, but there's always another." spiteful. It is in this moment that I cannot but come to the defense of Talos. Even if he did not know that he was pursuing his daughter, he has been characterized to refrain from violence. He tries his best to keep as many people safe as possible. He just tried to avoid killing a skrull he knew nothing of. It is clear that he would warn you rather than shoot, and then add the fact that you are his daughter. Of course he wouldn't fire. He would keep warning until his very last breath. There is no world where he would pull the trigger, not even by accident. In the following dialogue, Gaia learns from Talos that the skrulls she is working with killed her mother. Shocked and shaken, she runs away, but the seeds of a possible change of allegiance are planted. The acting from both father and daughter is strong. This is another cornerstone that I choose not to amend. Fury goes to a bar where Hill is waiting for him, and for once he actually speaks some Russian. He has a short exchange with a customer, then orders his drink and sits down with Hill to play a game of chess. During the game, the two discuss the director's so-called crisis of faith. They bring up details of the mission and talk about the dangers and road bumps aggravated by Fury's presumed ineptitude. The contents of the dialogue will be brought into consideration at a later point. For now, I would like to bring up an example of this sort of scene from a much more polished Disney production. In the TV show Andor, there are two characters named Luthen and Mon Mothma. The first is a rebel, fighting against the Emperor, attempting to subvert his reign. The other is a senator who disagrees with the Emperor and therefore funds the rebel operation. Luthen, in his daily life, owns a gallery of antiquities as a front for his schemes, and Mothma visits to discuss issues. The problem is, she has a chauffeur with her that cannot know about her illegal activities. Therefore, he is told to wait outside. The conversation between Mon Mothma and Luthen happens entirely in coded language. Only the audience that knows the subtext can decipher what is really being discussed. In addition to that, both of them switch their demeanor completely, depending on whether they are facing the window or not. Whenever they face the outside, they put on a joyful front, appearing as a customer and a shopkeeper, looking through merchandise, negotiating prices, and so on. Whenever one of them is turned away from the street, their expression is stern and serious, because they are talking about extremely dangerous exploits against the reigning government. Along the same line, I do not believe that Fury and Hill should be discussing their operation so openly, even if it is in English. They should be cloaking their conversation and their expressions so that the other customers in the bar do not have easy access to what shenanigans they get up to. This would give the actors a very interesting dynamic to portray, making use of their many years of experience, and it would be an avenue to explore the skill set a spy might have to acquire and refine to do their job effectively. Moving forward, Gaia and Talos get in contact, and they meet up in a secluded location. She is clearly having many doubts about what her companions are up to. She still attempts to bark at her father, but he bites back hard, reminding his daughter of her mother's killers, her mother's pride of her. He pleads for her to redeem herself, appealing to a whole lot of love and loss. The stern father, the merciful father, the grieving father, all coalesce in this scene. And with the material he was given, Ben Mendelsohn does an excellent job portraying all of that emotion. Therefore, this is the last cornerstone. The information given here is that the bags containing the bombs will be marked with infrared X's, and the protagonists will therefore be able to distinguish them. So, we head to the day of the attack. Fury, Hill, and Talos are in the plaza and locate the couriers with the bombs. They begin to chase, but Fury gets sidetracked when he notices the child with the colorful ball is here. She then turns into the lady on the bench, and furthermore into the homeless man, essentially revealing he is a skrull. Regardless, Fury allows himself to be led around by his curiosity, rather than keeping to the plan. Talos and Hill fail to stop the bombs being planted, and when they go off, many civilians are caught in the blasts. Hill, who at this point must be keenly aware that there are at least a few Skrulls in the square, sees Fury call out to her and immediately starts walking towards him, only to immediately be shot, because that in fact is not Fury, but a Skrull. The real Fury sees this, has a gun in hand, but doesn't shoot at himself, nor does his impersonator shoot at him. Just for the record, I believe that Director Fury would have shot his copycat on sight, either in the leg, or in the arm, or in the gut, even before the Skrull had the chance to trick Agent Hill. The imposter instead walks away scot-free, and Hill dies in Fury's arms. That marks the end of the episode. Presently, there is one topic I would like to discuss, and that is the matter of Fury. Very often in the runtime, to the point of being repetitive, the episode presents the theme that Fury is not at his sharpest. The snap has changed him. He's been absent for a long time. The show repeats variations of the same information without really developing it at all. Development which could have been done over the course of the several repetitions that are present. So, what if the dialogue explored his desperation, his willingness to go to Saber and start developing rather dangerous and risky projects, weapons powerful enough to counteract Thanos-level threats? Perhaps he could have considered revisiting Project Insight, a suit of armor around the world. We have already explored facets of this with Tony. Why not explore the reactions of a character with similar goals but a completely different skill set? Why not explore deeply how Fury suffers from this nightmare, his failure to protect his people, and begin to look towards how he can develop from here? Perhaps become more ruthless and reckless in a somewhat desperate attempt to keep the shadows at bay. Or maybe a newfound resolve to continue courageously in doing what is right regardless of the existential dread and the ominous certainty of ultimate defeat. I would obviously prefer for Director Fury to always be steadfast and capable, as I remember him so fondly. However, there is no reason for a crisis of faith not to be a very interesting avenue to explore his character. I just would like for the exploration to actually begin, rather than it being repeated over and over again that the crisis of faith merely exists. In conclusion, world building and character building are all part of the same whole. They are intertwined in a virtuous dance, and whenever one is lacking, the other suffers immensely. A well-fleshed out world gives its inhabitants opportunities to react to it in different and characterizing ways. Those reactions can go on to fill the world with more complexity, and the cycle repeats. This is the primary reason why I illustrate clearly the immense waste of the setting and city, the absence of the character of Moscow, the abundance of missed opportunities that derive from not leveraging the language, the unfamiliar ground, the fact that most of the characters are supposed to be very adaptable in unexpected circumstances given their backgrounds as spies or alien chameleons. My diagnosis is that the episode is plagued by laziness, lack of imagination, and little attention to detail on the part of the visual direction and the world building. The almost hour-long runtime could have been imbued with so much more color and detail, giving the attentive viewer an incentive to watch the episode multiple times and notice more reinforcing elements, improving the quality of the final product on every rewatch. As I alluded to in the introduction, this script has focused most prominently on small details, staying within the limitations put in place. Missing the forest for the trees, if you will. The only large-scale issue mentioned is the matter of Fury and his characterization. And so the question may be raised, why not tackle any of the larger problems that may or may not be there? As I said at the top, I believe there to be plenty of capable YouTubers devoted to doing that already. Therefore, I ask a question in return. Why waste energy attempting to impale my adversary with a spear when their armor has so many gaps in it that I can dispatch them with 1,000 cuts? And there you go. This has been my list of pedantic remarks on the first episode of Secret Wars. I hope you've enjoyed listening to my rambling, and I will see you in the future.